Yay! Hello, Alexandra.
Hello.
So good to be with you. And it is amazing that you and I are both in the same mastermind, the same group for quite a few months now. But this is our first time really digging in with one another. And what a way to dig in courageously.
Yes,
Thank you so
amazing.
much.
Well, thank you for having this opportunity to, you reached out. So
Yes.
thank you for that. And yeah,
Yay.
and making that connection possible.
Awesome, awesome. So I'm looking forward to our courageous conversation together. My intention of having this conversation are threefold. One is just to get to know you better and fall in love with Alexandra. Second is to really put my 5 steps formula for courageous conversations to the test. I believe in them. I know they're grounded in a lot of, science and research and just all sorts of awesomeness. And yet, the taste pudding. What's the proof is in the pudding?
Right.
Sorry, I always forget it. So I'm putting it to the test and making some pudding. And finally, is just to also encourage other people by having this and modeling this to encourage other people to be encouraged to be courageous in their
Mm.
conversations and relationships. So, what is your intention for having this courageous conversation with me?
Mm. I want to be vulnerable. I want to be present
Mm-hmm.
and authentic. And I think by so doing, we create connection and trust is built. We're
Mm-hmm.
just really newly met. So
Yeah.
I think just being willing to be vulnerable, really put ourselves out there, I think is going to help connect us and then serve as a model for other people to just feel comfortable being able to be vulnerable.
200%. I think vulnerability, relatively speaking, is a few years old concept for me that I took on. But authenticity is one of my core values. Like, if there is one thing I strive to be, it's authentic and sincere. So, yeah, I love that intention. Thank you. Awesome. And what is it that makes it so courageous for you to be vulnerable, to be so authentic and honest?
Hmm. Well, I think, and without getting too much into story, I think that I grew up with a mindset, maybe with my family, maybe societal, that it wasn't okay to be
Mm,
really vulnerable and authentic. I had to kind of put on a front
yeah,
and wear masks.
yeah.
And I've been over the last maybe decade, possibly a
Mm-hmm,
little bit less than that,
mm-hmm.
really starting to shed those masks that I unconsciously started to put on. So having vulnerable and
Yeah,
courageous conversations at first, and they're never really that comfortable. Oh, there's always a little something, right?
yes.
But at first it was really, really uncomfortable.
Mm,
Really just not I had to learn what it was to be
oh,
vulnerable and authentic
yes,
because
yes,
I didn't really feel like that. I felt
yes.
like I couldn't really present myself like that, I suppose. Yeah.
I feel you 200% on that. I think being vulnerable is a muscle. And so often, if you don't even know that muscle exists, then you're not going to use it. And if you start using it, it gets like all of those things that come with exercise and feeling stiff and sore, right? So that's
Right.
so, so true. Yes, yes.
And
So,
I've been using this as a muscle. Like I've been very intentional, even like kind of going back to your original question, being just really intentional of being vulnerable, being authentic, sharing my voice, saying what I have to say. That's all part of this facade that I kind of grew
yeah,
up with
yeah,
of having to present myself in such a way. But now it's like it's okay to be myself. It's
hmm,
okay to speak my voice. Yeah.
yeah,
And actually, like going back to the second question, that's really freaking powerful when you can feel afraid to be vulnerable and still do it because you know that you have to say what you need to say and you need to take a stand in whatever way.
Yes, yes. Isn't that crazy how we have to learn to be okay with being ourselves?
Mhm. This is extremely crazy, right? We
Yeah.
are ourselves when we're little kids. We're just our usually, with some
Yeah.
exceptions, most people grow up being okay,
Yes.
comfortable in their own skin, and then we
Yeah.
just end up having to take on these different masks
Yeah.
for whatever reason from your family or society or whoever places those masks or however you decide to take on this mask.
For sure. So, if I may start digging in, what is one of those masks that you feel you had on? And when did you realize it was a mask?
Mm. Well,
Um,
one of the things I shared with you earlier is talking about how we are in entrepreneurship,
yes.
and this is as of late because I've been in business for about 20 years, but have been an entrepreneur for about half of that, so about 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was the perfectionist mask.
Mm,
Perfectionist mask I took on when I was quite young to, I think to please my family, to please my parents, to be the good girl. And I took that on into adulthood. I took that
mm,
on in the corporate world. And then when
mm.
I became an entrepreneur, I felt that I had to, the fake it till you'll make it model that,
Yeah.
faking
Yeah.
it, pretending like everything's okay, pretending like everything's perfect, pretending like I've got it all together. 10
Mm-hmm.
years later, I don't have it all together. I have it all together. And that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So having to take that mask of, of being perfect. I think the perfect mask. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Um, I'm just being curious with you because I just want to know more and learn more. Two questions. One, what did perfectionism, that mask, look like for you? And two, what was that first moment like when you're like, oh my goodness, I don't have it together after 10 years, you know?
What did the perfectionist mask looked like? It was actually uh, exhausting.
Mm,
It was exhausting
mm,
because trying to be something that you're not,
mm. Yeah.
always having to look good, always having to say the things that you
Yeah.
think that I thought I needed to say. It's exhausting, and and even more exhausting
Mm-hmm.
because I'm over and above trying to make it look like I have it all together.
Mm.
So I was a performer growing up, musical theater performer. So I do have some acting. So I probably unconsciously brought on these that skill of being able to act like I have it all together.
Yeah. Wow.
And so that, yeah, but it's still exhausting. So I had to like,
Yeah.
after doing something, maybe let's say doing a talk or speaking or whatever, the preparation was exhausting. And then
Mm.
doing it, I'm on, but
Yeah.
then afterward, it was like a drop and I would feel tired and want to go to sleep and
Mm.
take a nap. So yeah, it literally was exhausting my body.
Wow.
And
Wow.
then I can't remember the second question. I
Um,
should have written it down.
what? No. I think it was, what was that first moment like when you
Mm,
realized you didn't have it all together?
yes. So it was about a year, maybe a little less into, no, maybe about 6 months after I resigned from the corporate world,
Mm,
where I had left with savings and was in a startup.
yeah.
And I felt like I was on top of the world. I thought that I was going to be making a ton of money within a few months. And then my savings dwindled down and I had a mortgage to pay. And it was a lot tougher than I thought it was going to be. It was a big
Mm-hmm.
challenge. And I remember for the first time, because I am actually a very happy person by nature. I have a fairly high, happiness set point.
Yeah.
And I got to this point where I started to spiral, and the closest I've ever felt to what depression could be. I have never been clinically depressed, but it's the most what I could think of depressed could be.
Wow.
My emotions were all over the place. I was out of control, ups and downs, crying all the time. And that was the first time I realized I really didn't have it together as an entrepreneur. That was
Mm.
really in the early days, too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what was worse is then continuing to put on those masks, knowing that I don't have my shit together,
Mm.
was even harder. It was more inauthentic. I was
Wow.
actually out of integrity because I
Yeah.
knew that I didn't have it together. And I'm
Wow.
presenting myself as I do,
Wow.
at least as best as I possibly could, presenting myself like I did.
Wow. That is so powerful. So what I'm hearing in that is that in the early years when you were in the corporate world, it was exhausting, but there wasn't the sense you didn't know what you didn't know. You just thought that's how corporate life is. This is how you
Yep.
live your life. This is a
Mhm.
performer. You put on a face, and then at some point after you left, and there was that spiral of this is harder than I thought, the depression or the things started kicking in, and you still felt the pressure to have the mask on, and at that point it felt like out of integrity because now you knew and you still had to. Wow. Wow.
Mhm. It took
Wow.
maybe, well, what's interesting is that as soon as I resigned,
Mm-hmm.
I at least knew enough to start taking hypnosis classes because I knew that there was something I needed to work on.
Yeah.
So that was maybe the start of me trying to take on incorporate other tools and
Yeah.
modalities
Yeah.
that were alternative tools and modalities to really help me to work through
Mm-hmm.
a lot of things. So I
Mm.
guess the silver lining there was that I at least had enough awareness to know
Yeah.
that something was up. This is a little
Yeah.
weird. It's uncomfortable. It's something's a little off. Let me see what I can do about it. And it maybe took about 5 years
Mm.
for me to really start to incorporate tools on a daily basis to help me through like
Mm-hmm.
EFT, like tapping and other tools like that
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
to incorporate on a daily basis
Yeah.
because okay, so felt depressed within 6 months, like really depressed within 6 months of entrepreneurship. So here I am year after year, still not making it,
Yeah.
still not earning enough income, or it was basically like I was always just getting by. And so
Mm.
after several years of that, it was not making enough money, feeling drained there, and then having to act, or not having to, but feeling the need to act
Mhm.
like I had it
Mhm.
all together.
200%.
Yeah.
I feel you. It's reminding me, there was this is way back in college. I had a friend who he happened to be African American, so very different culture than mine, very different experience than mine. And he said something to me that I just can never forget. He was like, I have to wear masks. Like I have different faces. Actually, he didn't use the word mask. He said faces. And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, I can't show up the same way I show up with you in other places. It's just not safe. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, and I remember that moment of me just saying, but how can you not be you? Like, how can you put, like, like I didn't understand the concept of having different faces. And now when I look back at it and look at myself and I become vulnerable and I become honest with myself, um, I don't think I had like the perfectionism that it's not like you put on a ulterior alter ego type personality like what was that movie with Jim Carrey, The Mask?
All right, the math. Mhm.
It wasn't like that. So having different faces, having different masks doesn't mean something that drastic. It can be something like you're sharing. And that's definitely been my experience too. Like growing up, a lot of what you shared resonated with me where I wasn't like I come from a really good family. They're intellectual. We traveled a lot, so we were always exposed to a lot of different ways of being and knowledge and everything. But I don't know, somehow that encouragement wasn't there to say what's on your heart, to say
Mm,
what's on your mind. And I also grew up with that sense of like, I don't know what to say. Is it
mm,
appropriate to say? How do I show up? So I was showing up in a smaller version of myself without even knowing it for such a long period of time. And once it finally hits, it was like, oh, there's more to me. And it was scary to acknowledge that there was more to
mm,
me
mm,
and what would change as a result of embracing that more. What would change in my family life? What would change in the way people perceive me? Like what would change in my choices? And it's all courageous. That whole journey of becoming is courageous, for
mhm.
sure.
And you mentioned the being small or feeling
Yeah,
small, or playing small.
yeah,
And I think that so you went through that of like having that gap where it's like you had to kind of bridge that so that you
yeah,
can step into your greatness and have
yeah,
that voice.
yeah.
And I went through a very similar journey.
Mm.
And I may have mentioned this, the good girl persona or mask that I
Yeah,
wore as a child always still kind of comes in now. It's like, oh, should I say that?
yeah,
What will people think of me if I say
yeah,
that? And that
yeah.
still comes up especially with my family. So my family is Cuban, and so being Hispanic, I think we share with these big family
Oh, yeah.
cultures,
Yes,
right? Where
yes.
there's always like the, oh God, what's the family gonna say? What are they gonna think? They're definitely gonna tell me what they think.
Right. When do
And
I get to tell them what I think?
yes, yes, yes. And actually, it just
Yeah.
reminded me that I'm the youngest daughter of three, and
Mm,
my older sisters. I remember thinking, at dinner tables, like my parents and my older sisters would be like, nah, 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 arguing or giving their points across, and then Alexandra's trying to get a word in edgewise, and then it's like I had
yeah.
to scream, and then I think there was like a Alexandra, why are you screaming? Be quiet. That type of a
Mm,
thing, maybe
yeah,
subconsciously
yeah.
ended up
Yes,
making me
yes,
feel like I needed to be small and wear
yeah,
this mask to
yeah,
not ruffle any feathers, not say
yeah,
anything that might be touchy
yeah.
or controversial. Yeah.
I hear
Isn't that
that.
deep when you start to really like uncover
Yeah,
and see what's under the surface?
yeah,
How we've compounded these masks over the years.
for sure. Our experiences, we're constantly making meaning of our experiences. My experience is different from you in the sense that, guess what? I'm also the youngest of three. So, yay, go youngest sibling. But it's different because my brother and sister, I think they're also really reserved. They also don't say much. So there were no arguments over the table in my house. And I think there was just so much silence that
Mm,
I had to learn when and how is it okay to actually speak up because no one else was speaking up around me. My
mm,
sister was a complete bookworm. Like you lock her up in a dungeon with books and she'll be happy,
right.
And I would go up to her and, she'd be like, go away, like that kind of a thing. And my brother, I don't know, he's amazing and he's just always been quiet. And, I tell him even today, you're a mystery to me.
Yeah.
One of these days I'll solve that mystery, but I don't know.
It's
Cool.
interesting as a third child
Yeah.
that we looked to our older siblings
Yes.
to see what was the right thing to do somehow,
Yes.
right? Like, and we
Yes.
ended up creating our own voice
Yes.
based on that. That's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Yeah.
very interesting. Huh? Family dynamics, how that comes into play with and sibling, placement, where it comes into like how your personality develops as
Yeah.
you get older.
Yeah. because that's our first exposure. And I know for me specifically, growing up, we moved around so much from one country to another. And so my dad's from India, my mom's from Pakistan, and I've lived in both countries, also in Dubai before I came here. And so, and I remember this sense of like every time I got close to somebody in school, like had a friend or whatnot, we would move, you
Mm,
know? And so my biggest influence wasn't my school, my peers, but my family. And so if it was super quiet at home, then quiet is good.
right.
You
Yeah.
know, if asking questions is not the norm, then that is not the norm. And then I would, for the summer holidays, my cousins would come over from London and they had a completely different energy than we did. Like there was a lot more of screaming over the table and running around and that hyperness and whatnot. And I remember even in those situations, I would often be the observer, not because I didn't know what to contribute, but in that space, I just felt lost. Like I didn't know how to contribute more, and it didn't necessarily feel painful then. But looking back now, I can see how how little of myself I expressed, and
Mm,
that is painful. Especially when I consider sincerity and authenticity being my number one value, I feel like a part of me was closed off and unauthentic growing up.
mm.
Yeah,
Yes. And going back to courage and like seeing where are you and you want to step up and like bridging that gap.
yeah,
How much effort we've probably, I'm sure, I know I hear this with my peers, with my
mm-hmm,
clients, how
mm-hmm.
much effort we have to make to get back to that
200%.
place of just being
Exactly.
ourselves and being free and
Exactly.
having an authentic voice.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
it's quite
200%.
liberating once you have it, but
Yes.
what to the steps to get there,
Yeah.
it can be challenging. It's gonna be tough and even sometimes you might feel demoralized. I mean, so many
Mhm.
emotions can come up in that
Yes.
process of trying to get your voice, just being able to
200%.
speak your voice vulnerably.
Yes, yes. So I'll just like to add on to that, that yes, it is, all of that is vulnerable and courageous in itself, and it's a journey and it is challenging. And once you quote unquote get there, like you and I have gotten somewhere, it is
Hmm.
still uncomfortable and courageous and vulnerable to share what we have to share and be in this kind of a conversation. And I think it always will stay uncomfortable. If not on this topic, then on that topic. If not in this relationship,
Right,
then in that relationship. And that's okay. So
right,
our discomfort doesn't have to be a signal of something is wrong. It can be instead a signal of, hey, time to grow. Hey, time to be more of you. And I think that is exactly why having courageous conversations is so important to me, because it's a way for me to make sure that I stay aligned with my purpose of being authentic and helping others to be authentic and to acknowledge that being authentic with one another, even on hard topics like race or politics or religion or, I don't know, whatever thing that you disagree on, um, is so it's vulnerable. There is
you
some
know,
risk involved.
I love that you said that about even when you get to a certain level, it's still a challenge. You still have to be vulnerable. You still have to be authentic. You still have to be courageous.
Mm-hmm.
I've been I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but I've been afraid of public speaking for
Mm-hmm.
most of my life.
Wow.
And so this journey of me speaking has been parallel to
Mm-hmm.
these masks that I started to uncover when I became an entrepreneur.
Wow.
And I've spoken hundreds of times in
Mm-hmm.
different formats and different modalities. And when I tell people that I'm afraid of speaking, they're like, no way. Because I performed and all that. Like they think me of one way, and I'm like, no, I'm really afraid. Like I'm really, really, really afraid. And what's so cool is that I tell them, I'm still afraid. I'm
Yeah.
still afraid.
Yeah.
So I've done a tremendous amount of work
Yes.
to get where I am. Like when we
Yes.
said, get there.
Yes.
And it's still a work in progress. There's still an evolution. And I don't know if I'll ever 100% be not afraid of speaking.
Mhm.
But that also, in a way, has made me better.
Yeah.
It's made me more conscious. It's
Yeah.
made me more present.
Yeah.
And gosh darn it, I actually, like, I know I care,
Yes.
right? Like, I know
Yes.
I care.
200%. So what I'm hearing is that because you care, because you're committed, because you're courageous, you go and do it. And woohoo, you do it amazing. And that doesn't mean that you are not afraid. Like that fear still kicks in. So I'm curious, what does that fear look like for you now? It's obviously not visible to anyone else. I also cannot believe. And it's true for
Well,
you.
physical symptoms have decreased, by the way.
Mhm.
However, I still get very nervous. Physically, I sweat.
Mhm.
There was a time when I used to sweat all over my face. So
Uh-oh.
that made me even more sweat more
Yeah, yeah, because you
because I'm
get
like, oh my God, I'm
conscious.
sweating. Right. It was just so uncomfortable. So
Yeah.
I'm beyond that level. I do
Mhm.
still sweat, but I'm beyond that, like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Uh, I still sometimes, have my throat clamps up. I've always kind of had like throat chakra, throat
Mm,
issues when I have to speak. So my
yeah,
throat will clamp up.
yeah,
So I actually have a lot of physical symptoms. Even as much as I work through them, I still
yeah.
have some of those physical symptoms.
I hear.
And a lot of fear and anxiety prior to speaking.
Mm, that
So I really help prep
anticipation.
myself up, do a lot of meditate, do some
Mm-hmm.
healing work if
Mm-hmm.
necessary, to get to that stage. Mm-hmm.
200%. I feel ya.
Still shows up,
I feel ya.
and
It's
it's
not
okay.
visible.
And
Yeah,
it's okay.
it's totally okay.
In fact, by us
So okay.
being, I know, and I've actually gotten clients because of this,
Yeah.
because I've told people that I am afraid
Yes.
and I still do it.
Yes.
And they're like, wow, I've made it so that it's almost like disarming for them. Like they feel more comfortable
200%.
connected, and
Yes.
then like I can really help them. I get it.
Yes.
Versus if I was actually super perfect,
Yes.
like this persona that I tried to be
Yeah.
for so many years.
Yeah. So true. It's like it creates that real relatability, right? You become relatable all of a sudden. And I think vulnerability is courageous. It's like once you show up in that
It is
way,
courageous. Mm-hmm.
yeah, it invites, it gives permission to the other person to also say, hey, I'm afraid too. Hey, I'm imperfect too. Hey, I'm sweating here too. It's all so, so true. So thank you so much for being courageous enough to really step into yourself, to keep doing it afraid even when you sweat a lot, um, to put so much love in that sweat, right? There you go. My goodness, that's
Brand
perfect.
myself with love.
There you go. I love that. I love that. And I love how you became willing and are still willing to say, hey, what else is a facade? What other face am I wearing? And what face feels most real and authentic and an integrity for me?
Mhm.
So, yay to being courageously honest. Yay.
No, and thank you for creating this space too. I think that just having the space
Yeah.
allows us to step up, to be
Yeah.
courageous, to be vulnerable and courageous by
Yeah.
offering just space for
Yes.
others. So thank you
Yes.
for that.
It's easier in community, right?
Mhm.
For sure. And
1000%. Yes.
yes, yes. So, anything else you'd like to add in terms of what you found most valuable from this particular courageous conversation?
Hmm. I love when you reframed the what we said about, getting there,
Mm-hmm.
and like all of a sudden making it, just making sure that we know that, like, oh, hey, once you get there, it's not like poof, everything's like
I'm
perfect.
there.
Going back to that perfect word, that it's all going to be easy and perfect. Like,
Yeah.
no, we still get to be vulnerable, authentic, courageous, even at
Yes.
those other levels. And in fact, and sometimes more.
Yes.
But
Yes.
I think that it's like you said, the muscle.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the more we exercise it, the more we
Yeah.
flex it,
Yeah.
the more comfortable we are with being uncomfortable in those spaces.
Mm,
So
so
yeah,
true.
let's just
So
keep being
true.
vulnerable.
Let's do it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Alexandra. Thank you.
Such a pleasure to have
Yay.
these conversations with you. Thank you for this.
Woohoo. Big hug.
All right.
Yay with the heart.